Over the past few decades, our world has become increasingly more globalized, with new technologies and industries that create relationships across borders, as well as new threats of war and terrorism that seek to divide us. An occurrence in one nation has effects and repercussions all across the globe. We are all connected. Our political systems, economies, cultural institutions, and religions, all of it is intertwined. There are trade agreements such as NAFTA and peacekeeping bodies such as the UN that bind sovereign states together. When oil is discovered in Saudi Arabia, the economy fluctuates here in the United States. One simple act of terror halfway across the globe has the power to unite seemingly opposite countries against evil. Even a microscopic bacteria from sub-Saharan Africa has the power to reach a small town in Frisco, Texas, inciting an epidemic. Every issue in our world changes the fate of humanity. Now, imagine that in this chaotic and convoluted world, you had the power to take a part in shaping the future, acting as a catalyst for change. This is the field of international relations. By understanding the way our connected world works, we have a hand in maintaining the positive relationships that exist between nations, preventing war through treaties and agreements, and interacting with people from all walks of life to ensure a peaceful and democratic future for generations to come. It has been through the work of people in the field of IR that our global society has remained stable, and the future depends on healthy international relations in the years to come. Hi there. My name is Max Webb. I'm a senior at FHS studying international relations this year in ISM. Just a little bit about myself. I was born in Boca Raton, Florida, and I moved here 15 years ago because of my dad's business. My dad is a serial entrepreneur, so he has a lot of different businesses within the medical field. I have a large family. I love my family absolutely more than anything. I have a dad and a stepmom. They just got married last May. I have two blood siblings. I have my older sister Lizzie, who is 29, almost 30, and she has 3 kids herself. My nephew North, who just turned 4, my niece Claire, who just turned 5, and my nephew Aiden, who's 6, almost going to be 7. And then I have my younger brother Joey, who's 14, and he's a freshman here at Frisco. My family, like I said, they mean everything to me. I have cousins. I know my 6th cousins. Like, my family is huge, and I love everything about them. I have been a part of a few different organizations in the past. The biggest one is called Young Judea. It's the National Zionist Leadership Youth Movement of the United States. So basically, I've gone to summer camps with them for the past years, having leadership opportunities, traveling all across the United States and to Israel. I lobbied with them on Congress, on Capitol Hill. And I've had just a lot of different opportunities to lead their programs and help with them. I also had an internship last year with our state representative, Scott Turner. I did research and community outreach for them, and that was really cool getting to see a little bit of the political thing. I love traveling, and as of now, I've been to 20 countries in 27 states. I'm getting my 21st country for spring break this year, which will be Spain, which I'm really excited for, and I love it. So, why international relations? My single biggest passion in life is traveling the world and learning everything I can about the people, languages, and cultures within it. And so, a little bit about where this came from. It sort of started as a coping mechanism for me, but it developed into so much more. So in the year 2012, I unfortunately had to watch 3 people in my family battle cancer. I had my mom, who battled stage 4 pancreatic cancer, my dad, who fought stage 2 kidney cancer, and my grandma, who fought stage 2 breast cancer, all at the same time in the 6-month period. And it was very difficult, and unfortunately, my mother passed away. My father and my grandmother, they both survived, thank goodness. But that summer, after all of this crazy stuff happened, my family resorted to traveling as sort of an outlet, and I also began to research different cultures and ideologies from all around the world, because when I would travel or research about another place, it took me away from the sadness that encompassed my life every day. And what started as this coping mechanism developed into just a full throttle passion for learning everything I can about the world around us. In school, I've studied Spanish. I'm in AP Spanish 5, French. I'm in Pre-AP French 2, and I studied 2 years of Mandarin Chinese just within school, and I've studied a few different other languages outside of school. I I love flags. That's one of my kind of nerdy passions. If you go like into my room, every country that I've been to, I have a flag on my wall, and I have posters of flags of the world. And I think I counted, I have over 400 representations of flags in my room and in the hallway coming up to my room. That's not just flags, like posters, pictures that have flags on them. Like, I really like flags. And I can name countries and capitals like they're my friends. Like, it's kind of weird, but it's really fun. Like, I play like flag nerd games on my phone, and it's a unique little passion that I have, but it's kind of nerdy, but it's fun. So, what is international relations? So international relations is a branch of political science that's concerned with the relations between countries. So if you're a student in international relations, you study the interactions between the different types of governments around the world, the languages, and global culture and history. But really, it's such a broad and interdisciplinary field. Someone who's studying international relations could go into something with business, with politics, with medicine and education. And there's a lot of subcategories too, such as international development, peace and conflict resolution, international law, international security, foreign policy making, and even region-specific studies. Some skills that you need in this field: very good personal communication skills. You need to have intelligence. You need to be quick on your feet, quick thinking. And then careers that you can go into within this field: diplomacy in the State Department, so you could be a foreign service officer, which is like sort of leading up to being an ambassador of a different country. You could work for the UN, the CIA, the FBI, or many NGOs, non-government organizations, that work all across the world for humanitarian reasons. So I think, I'm going to go back one more. I think that international relations is the perfect fit for me because it allows me to take my life passions and apply them to the real world. I love to help people, and I love talking to people, having conversations. I have a story that when I was 14 years old and I went to the Grand Canyon, and we woke up at like 3 in the morning to go see the sunrise over the Grand Canyon to get there. And I was just with a bunch of friends, and I just stood away from the group, and I just went up to this lady who was from some Asian country, and I just started talking to her, just like, where's she from? And it turned out she was from Japan, and we had a whole conversation about where she was from. But I love reaching out to people and getting to know everything about them. I do that with like taxi drivers. Like when I'm in New York, I spent 4 hours talking to a guy from Pakistan in Chicago traffic one time, just because I could. It was a lot of fun. So the first part of our ISM process is the interviews. And so I went on 6 informational interviews with professionals who are in the international relations field within the Dallas area. So the first person that I interviewed was the Consul General of El Salvador, the Honorable Jose Mario Mejia Barrera. And so what a consul is, you know, an embassy is like the diplomatic representation of one country in another. So a consul is like a branch of that embassy spread around through the country. So we have a branch of the Embassy of El Salvador found in Dallas. And this was a great interview, but it was kind of scary, mostly for the fact that this interview was supposed to be entirely in Spanish, which isn't my first language. I'm not fluent, and even though I've studied it a lot, I was terrified going into this because I don't know what he's going to say, and there was no translator. But it turned out that he was a very friendly man. I understood a good portion of what he said. He spoke slow. I spoke slow. We tried to communicate. And he just talked to me about life growing up in El Salvador and what El Salvador's missions are here in the United States. And from this interview, I learned the true importance of language education in the international relations field. Because when studying another language, you're able to break down barriers like this. Had I not learned a little bit of Spanish before, I would not have been able to communicate with him at all. But when speaking in your local, or in their local language, you're able to understand someone so much better. And that's why I really try to learn as much as I can about languages, even if it's just a phrase. It can help get you a step in the door with someone that you may not have had before. My next interview was with a man named Mr. John Ernst. He was a former UN executive who worked for the UN Business Council. Some interesting things about Mr. Ernst is he worked in Europe right after World War II and in between World War II and the Cold War. So the big thing, he worked with exchange programs so that we could get our former enemies, such as Germany and Japan, to have representation. We would take their people and have them come to the U.S., and we would send our U.S. people over there so that our countries could create positive images with each other, because we just come back from killing each other. We didn't want it to stay like this, and these were countries that had prosperous futures, so we wanted to form relationships with them. So through the UN Business Council, Mr. Ernst did that. He lived in Belgium, a country I was lucky to travel to last summer, and I was talking to him. It turns out his office was right in a square that I was sitting in watching a show of mimes when I cut my finger on a piece of glass in the street, and I had to like run into his building to like get a Band-Aid, which was really cool. I had no idea. And so another important thing that Mr. Ernst did was he was at the 1972 Olympics when the Israeli team was kidnapped. So that was a huge political event to be part of. And to witness that firsthand was very cool. What Mr. Ernst taught me was that education is so important. So he went to Georgetown University, one of the universities that I'd applied to and that I'd love to go to. And he just made a big impact on my life in the fact that he told me you need to get an education, and a master's degree will help you go even further in this field. So don't just slack off in college, don't slack off in high school, but really take the most advanced courses you can and really set yourself up to be successful in the future. The next lady that I met was Miss Sharon Venable. She's the CEO of the Dallas Committee on Foreign Relations. And what they do is they bring speakers from all across the world to talk about international topics. And it's a private membership only organization, and so it's very exclusive. And the benefit of this kind of organization is that people are allowed to listen to political issues, world political issues, and debate them in a healthy environment. And it talks about cross-cultural exchange. And she was a very nice lady. She was elderly. We met at Starbucks, and we just talked a lot about her career. She worked with the mayor of Dallas, trying to bring international business to Dallas for a long time before finding her calling with the CEO, with the Committee on Foreign Relations. Ms. Venable taught me the important thing of opportunity. She was so impressed by this program, the ISM program, and she said that I had to take opportunities whenever they come to me. She offered me an internship. She was so thrilled to hear what I was doing, and she told me to continue to update her on what I was studying throughout the year. My fourth interview was with Mr. Jim Falk of the Dallas World Affairs Council, and I chose him to be my mentor. So the goal of the Dallas World Affairs Council is to promote international awareness, understanding, and connections to influence our region's global stature and prepare North Texas to thrive in our complex world. Now, this is like the Committee on Foreign Relations, only it's a little bit bigger and more well known, and also it's not as exclusive, so more people can have opportunities to hear international speakers and take these opportunities to meet and listen to different people. So Mr. Falk, he was a mentor in ISM before, which was what made my meeting with him a little bit different, because he kind of had an understanding of the program. And he was more asking me questions like, what do you want to study already? And we didn't talk as much about his career himself, but what I did learn interesting is that he's the honorary consul of Morocco. And something that I learned from him was that Dallas is truly an international city. And before I was going into this, I was worried I wouldn't find people in Dallas that I could talk to, because I was like, who internationally comes to Dallas? But there are so many opportunities for business and diplomacy from other countries just within our Dallas area. And just because we may not be the first place on your mind when you think of international, like New York or DC, there are so many opportunities here. And since choosing him to be my mentor, I've had a ton of experiences, amazing experiences. I love his organization, and I'll talk to you about that in just a sec. The next interview I had was with Mr. Ken Niesman. He's the honorary consul of Finland. So what an honorary consul is they're like a consul general, but they don't have official legal representation. He's not from Finland. He's an American citizen who got started doing business with Finland. And so he represents the Finnish people in the Dallas area, but he has no legal ties to Finland. So he mainly helps with passports and such. And he travels to Scandinavia often. He drove up to the Arctic Circle, he told me one night, just to dip his foot in the Arctic Ocean to see what it felt like. He's been to Finland and Norway and Sweden and Russia a ton. And one thing I learned about him was or learned from him was about different types of economies in the world and how Finland, when he works, and most Scandinavian countries are socialist, which generally has a negative connotation here. But he told me that it's not bad, it's just different, and that different places around the world function differently based on their different cultures. And he taught me that even when you have these differences, culturally, economically, it's still possible to cooperate and get stuff done, which is one of the most important things about international relations and diplomacy. The next lady that I met was Miss Maria Johnson. So this was more focusing towards the international development part of international relations. She was from Czechoslovakia, but is Hungarian in descent, and she works for a company called Charity Water. So what Charity Water does is they partner with third world countries, with organizations in third world countries, local organizations, to bring water and hygiene resources to poor communities. And I really wanted to learn about like what's happening with the world with the water crisis, because there's some scary statistics out there that, you know, in this past year, countries like Syria and Iraq were supposed to run out of fresh water, which is really scary, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa where people are starving and dying every day because of lack of water. And she taught me just how important that water, the resource, was to the world, because through water you can help. In these third world countries, women a lot of times have to trek 2 miles with heavy buckets of water on their back in order to just get water for their families. So that hinders education opportunities for them, health hazards, and the water is not a lot of times clean. So when you put these water resources into these third world countries, they're able to improve education, overall economy, and really quality of life. What I really learned from her was that I can make a difference. A lot of times as teenagers you think, oh, it's too broad, too grand, I can't accomplish that, but through her organization, just a little donation, it directly impacts people's lives across the world. And I can make a difference, and I can truly change someone's life, which is something that I've always wanted to do and that I'm very passionate about. So I chose Mr. Falk to be my mentor, as I mentioned earlier, and so far it's been amazing. I've done things such as shadow him through meetings. I've interned at their office a few times. Like I was saying earlier, last night I had to organize their entire library. But even an experience like that, I got to like look at all these titles of international books written by famous people, and I would learn a little bit. I got to even borrow a few books from them, which was really cool. I've also gotten to attend a lot of the World Affairs Council events, so I got to hear Ben Bernanke, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, speak, and I got to sit 4 seats down from President George Bush and his wife Laura, which was kind of incredible. And like I mentioned the last time I gave a speech, I was politically fangirling the whole time. It was just a crazy experience to sit next to like an actual president. I got to meet a man named Mr. Karl Rove, who was the chief of staff under the Bush administration, and the chief of staff has a lot of say in how the governments run. They give the president advice all the time, and so Karl Rove basically ran our country at one time, and it was funny. I walked into the presentation and I sat down, and Mr. Falk called me over. He goes, "Max Webb, get over here." And I was like, oh my goodness, what's wrong? And he introduced me to Karl Rove. But little did I know, I had my shirt collar popped up. So Karl Rove, the former chief of staff for the Bush administration, fixed my collar and then looks at my mentor and goes, well, Jim, you can dress him up, but you can't take him out. So I kind of got like insulted by Karl Rove, but it was kind of cool, and it was a learning experience. Like also like make sure that like you fix everything and like you always look super professional, but really cool to meet him. Just last week, I got to go hear a presentation from Robert S. Litwack, who he's with the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, I believe, and he is a big international relations scholar. He's taught at George Washington University, and he's an expert on nuclear proliferation. And so he talked about the Iran nuclear deal and how it affects the U.S. and its allies, which is something very interesting because it's so modern and current. And I'm about to have a lot of new opportunities. Tomorrow I'm going to hear a Middle Eastern comedian speak with them. Next week I get to go have a private KERA screening to see an ambassador give an interview, and I'm probably going to get to interview him afterwards. I'm going to get to meet the U.S. ambassador to Israel and the French ambassador to the United States, and I'm going to get to interview them, which are really cool experiences that I'm looking forward to. And Mr. Falk is a great guy, and I've learned so much just about the field just from being able to be with him. So now I want to talk a little bit about my original work. So my original work was about the Catalan secession movement. And so I was doing some research trying to figure out what I wanted to study for my original work, and I was reading a bunch of articles where I noted a high concentration of secession movements, that is, nations that want to separate from their existing countries in order to establish independence. And there's a high concentration of that in Europe. So I was really interested in just figuring out more what was happening, so I started researching different movements, and I researched the Scottish movement seceding from the UK, the Venetian movement trying to secede from Italy, and the Catalan movement trying to secede from Spain. And I really thought that the Catalan movement had a lot of thrust behind it, and there's a lot of information to work with, and also because of my working knowledge of Spanish and the fact that for spring break this year I'm going to Barcelona, which is the capital of the Catalan region. I thought that it would be a perfect opportunity to apply what I've learned through the school year in real life. So what's going on? So the region of Catalonia, like I said, is home to Barcelona, and it has a very unique history and unique culture different from the rest of Spain. And they've had a long persecuted history by different entities, France and Spain, and now they feel very untreated by the tax code that's being enforced upon them. And so the Catalan region, or Catalonia, wants to separate from Spain. And so when I began my research, I wanted to figure out, were they justified? And if so, what could I do about it? What kind of project could I create? So here was my plan of action. So my first thing was, when I first discovered European secession movements, like I said, I researched a bunch of different movements, and then I would write an assessment, a page to 3-page research paper about the 3 movements that I studied: Scotland, Venice, and Catalonia. Then I picked the Catalan movement, and I began to do additional research, and I read so many articles about this place. My portfolio, I didn't put my portfolio up. My portfolio, as you can tell in my portfolio, my binder was so thick because of all the different research that I had. I had so many articles, and I could talk about this topic forever. And so after all my research, I decided that Catalonia deserves to secede. I believe they're completely justified. And so I went about writing an essay justifying their secession. I sort of call it my secession treaty. And then I wrote an entirely new plan for their government. So why should Catalonia secede? So the first point is that the Catalan people have a completely different history and culture and language than the rest of Spain. They speak Catalan, not Castellano-Spanish, which is what the rest of Spain speaks. And a lot of times, especially under the Franco regime during Spain's dictatorial period between like 1937 and 1970, the Catalan people, they had their language repressed, their culture repressed. The Spanish government basically tried to force them into assimilating to Spanish society. And this wasn't the first time that had happened. Throughout history, the Catalan people, who were once their own republic, were forced to join in with Spain when the King of Castilla when Ferdinand and Isabella married, and their land was sort of brought together. And the Catalan people did not want to join Spain, and they'd been persecuted for a very long time. And now currently what's happening is the taxation policy is very unfair towards the Catalan people. So basically, Catalonia is one of the wealthiest regions of Spain. And so they're taxed a lot more, which isn't uncommon in a lot of wealthy regions. The issue is that they're not returned as much money as they are taxed. So say they give $1, they only receive like 30 cents. Like, they're lacking 70 whole cents of what they put in. And so instead of just lifting up the poorer regions, they're basically swapping places. And currently, Catalonia has like a 22.7% unemployment rate, which is extremely high given the fact that in the United States, I think we're at 5% right now. So imagine just in your little region having 22% of the population completely unemployed is ridiculous, because when the central government in Madrid takes their money, and they're not given enough back, they can't build infrastructure, they can't create jobs, they can't provide education, and I think that it is very unfair. Their well-being is being, the policy is detrimental towards their well-being. So I just designed a plan for an entirely new government, and it was a lot to write on a note card, so I just kind of printed out what I was going to, exactly what I wrote. So basically, for the government structure, Catalonia, the region, is home to 4 states in Spain: Tarragona, Barcelona, Lleida, and Girona. And so I took these 4 states, dissolved their borders, and looked at a population map of Catalonia, and I divided the region into 10 provinces based on population. And each province has one vote. So the province, based on popular vote, elects one official. And so out of the 10, they each have one legislative official that will sit on a legislative board. Then the country as a whole, based on popular vote, will elect one president to preside over that board. So the president and the 10 people, based on each of the provinces, will make the entire decisions for the entire country, which some people are like, well, that seems kind of small. But as I've learned throughout different studies of governments, that a big government, it doesn't always work. It may work in America, but in a small European nation, that's not the case. So I sort of wanted to model this after I'm like a modern version of the Roman Republic found back in the olden days. So the executive structure, the president is going to have, he's like the commander-in-chief and the public figurehead, and he's also the head diplomat, and he can propose legislation to the legislative board, and he can also vote to break a tie because there's 10 people, so if you have 5 people voting for one issue and 5 people saying, no, we don't want it, the president of the country can break the tie. The judicial structure, each province will have its own district court to deal with interprovincial judicial matters, and disputes between provinces will be solved by a 3 to 5 person tribunal council appointed by the president but approved by the legislative council. Another thing, so when you establish a new country, you have to look at the economic structure. So Catalonia is going to need 2 sources of income: tax revenue and banking. And so the taxes, what I've just designed is that the taxes will pay for infrastructure, defense, and a police force. And so it will initially need to start as a socialist system and develop into a capitalist system. What I mean by this is that it will be tax brackets, so it's called a progressive tax rate, and they will start at very high rates. Because when you separate from your home country, basically what's going to happen is you're going to lose a ton of money. So they need to have really high taxes to get the revenue in. Then over a 5-period year of time, the percentages will drop incrementally so that the people in the banks can have more of their money back. And then the bank will handle private sector money. And so that's basically how the economy is going to work. And then another thing, the currency, when Catalonia separates from Spain, they're going to have to leave the EU, which is they're going to have to establish an entirely new currency. Military power, I've decided that like Israel and Switzerland, when Catalonia is 18, when a Catalan person is 18, they should join the military, required service. But instead of just going to war, because I don't think they'll be fighting a lot of wars at first, the military will also train them in a specific field that can be translated into a job after they get out of military service and go into their education. And the last thing about their government structure would be their foreign relations. So I said that Catalonia should first, if they can, establish very peaceful relations with Spain and the EU, because that's where they're going to get most of their trade and business from. But they should also try to get recognition from the UN and form relationships with similar states like themselves, like Israel and the Balkan states, who have similar histories and similar sorts of governments and establishments. And so also China really likes these fresh new territories. So I assume that China would want to have a lot of investment in Catalonia, which could be a huge source of revenue for the Catalan people. So I say they should go with the Chinese. And I don't think they should try to form immediate relations with places like the US, only because we have such important ties in Europe that we may not favor them in every agreement. So that's basically my original work. So plans for the future. So first I wanted to talk about some plans for ISM that I have for this semester. I really want to focus on the field of international development, which is providing aid to third world countries and how the U.S. can best do that. And so the idea I've thought of so far, which isn't final, is I want to develop a high-speed railway through Western Africa. So basically the reason for this is that the U.S. gives a lot of foreign aid to third world countries, but a lot of times when you just fork over money to people, it goes into the wrong hands or nothing gets done and you don't actually train the people in what they need to do. So by investing money in the private sector, we'll be able to create jobs and create revenue that will naturally boost the economies up. And I think the U.S. should preside and train all the people in like engineers and business people on how to do it, but that all the jobs should be based on African people so that the revenue stays within the country. And this, by creating this line of trains, it'll increase trade. There will be trade agreements. It can generate thousands upon thousands of jobs and millions of dollars in revenue for all these West African nations. And in the future, because I project this as a long-term project, look 50 to 100 years down the road when these economies have completely developed, the U.S. has new allies in case we ever go to war and new people for resources and trade potential, because I believe that Africa, not a lot of people deal with it right now, but it's an entire continent just full of resources. And while we're so invested in like Middle Eastern oil and with the Chinese, why not invest in a totally new part of the world where we have all of this potential to do something and like really change the destiny of how the world works. So that's what my idea for my final product. It's not finalized yet, but I'm really excited.